to the All Around Adventure Podcast, the show where you hear amazing tales from afar and the all-important life lessons that go along with them. Here's your host, Josh Guerrero.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? It is Josh Guerrero here, and welcome to the All Around Adventure Podcast. Whether you're joining me for the first time or if you've been listening to the podcast for a while now, I certainly do want to welcome you here. And as always, I want to thank you for being here today. I know you're busy. I know you got a lot going on, and I also know that there's a lot out there on the internet these days that's trying to get your attention and distract you, but it just means so much to me that you've chosen to download and listen to this podcast. Now, if you are in fact new to this podcast and you're not entirely sure what we're all about here, there's a show where you hear amazing tales from afar and get the all-important life lessons that go along with them. And those will be stories from myself as well as the amazing guests that I welcome on this podcast. And I'm talking with travelers of all kinds on this show. I'm talking with elite warriors, digital nomads, best-selling authors, bloggers, adventurers, philanthropists, you name it. If they have a fantastic travel story to tell with some great life lessons to share, it's my job to seek them out and bring them on this podcast and extract their stories and life lessons through powerful conversations to help you level up in your life. And I have a fantastic guest joining me for this episode. For today, I'll be talking with Marine Corps veteran, podcast host, and stand-up comedian, Chris Palmitessa. Now, this is actually Chris's second appearance on the All Around Adventure Podcast. He first joined me a couple years ago, and we had a great discussion on how to cultivate your warrior soul, though much has changed since he last came on the show. Back in 2020, he moved 3,000 miles across the country from Los Angeles, California to South Florida. He also began pursuing stand-up comedy and has appeared in as well as hosted several shows in the Miami metro area, and I've even had the opportunity to see him along with a few other veteran comedians perform in Miami a few months back, and I had a really good time. They were really funny comedians. And along with doing stand-up comedy, Chris is also the host of the Warrior Soul podcast, which is a show that is committed to helping the U.S. veteran community and anyone else willing to listen to live their best lives. And in this episode, Chris is going to tell us about his decision to move across the country and how he's adapted to that change. And he also talks about his transition to comedy, and we talk about some of the dark humor that is often utilized by much of the veteran community and how that weighs into some of his acts. And we also have a discussion on taking risks in life and how to express yourself creatively. So lots to talk about today. This is a really great conversation. I really had a great time catching up with Chris, and I really hope that you all enjoy this one. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right on into this. And this is my conversation with Chris Palmitessa. All right, here we go, everyone. Another awesome episode of the All Around Adventure Podcast, and I'm excited to welcome back Chris Palmitessa to the podcast, who's a Marine Corps veteran and a stand-up comedian. So, Chris, what's going on, brother? Welcome back to the show.
Hey, man. Good to be back here. How's everybody doing out there?
I've been looking forward to getting you back on the show, but, a lot has changed since I last had you on. You've made the move all the way across the country from California to South Florida. You got into stand-up comedy, and I had a chance to come down to Miami to watch you perform. And also, you're using a different name than what I introduced you as last time. Last time right. I introduced you as Chris Albert. Now you go by Chris Palmitessa, at least in the realm of comedy. So let's start there first, man. The name change, fill us in on the origins of the name change.
So that's actually, Palmitessa is actually my mom's last name. I never knew my father growing up at all. I've actually no familial attachment to the name Albert. The name Albert is my mom's ex-husband's last name, who I'd actually have no blood relation to and never met in my life. So, I didn't find out until I was age 40 that I was a sperm donor baby. So, found that out. And when I decided to go into stand-up comedy, I haven't legally changed my last name, but I decided to use that name instead. And so that's a big reason why, my mom's last name was Palmitessa, and like I said, I had no kind of real attachment to the name Albert, except for that's what people called me. So
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Very cool, man. So just again, lots of changes as I've mentioned. You were in Southern California along the coast for many years, but then you made the change and you went all the way across the country to Fort Lauderdale, where you are now. So what really brought on that change? Because, I mean, well, especially going that far, you literally went 3,000 miles across the country. And there's a lot of, United States in between, Miami and Southern California. So, yeah, fill us in on what brought about this change and what led you to Florida over, I guess, any other place.
Yeah. So, I mean, last time I was on here, I was actually very sick. I have autoimmune disease. I have a disease called ulcerative colitis. I was dealing with a lot of medical issues from that. And I was kind of coming to the tail end of my personal training career because of that. So I had been, doing personal training, coaching bodybuilders, things like that, for a long time. But it's kind of hard to do that when you end up, down to 140 pounds and look like a skeleton and things like that. So
sure. Yeah.
And the bodybuilding lifestyle, so to speak, wasn't doing me any favors with the autoimmunity. I couldn't really process all the protein. So I really had to stop doing that. I was kind of trying to figure out what to do with myself for a long time. And that was like a really hard crisis on my part because, bodybuilding and fitness were like me. It was my identity for such a long time. And I really didn't have anything else. And so I got offered a job and it was running a manufacturing company out here in South Florida. And I decided to take it. It's a great job. We're one of, a dying breed manufacturing products here in the United States,
right. Yeah.
It was in the state of Florida and I talked to my girl and she'd been in California her whole life. And I said, is this something you might want to do? And she said, yeah. So we ended up moving out here. And we've been here for 2.5 years. And since I came out here and I've been running this company, I've gotten into real estate investing. I bought 2 houses. That's how it's been out here, man.
Nice. Right on, brother. I think it's kind of tricky, especially, you mentioned that you're in a relationship. I think sometimes it's tricky for just one person to just uproot themselves from a place that they've been to for years and move across the country, let alone have the conversation with someone else, that's part of your life to try to make that change with you. So I guess, what did that conversation kind of sort of look like? I mean, was that pretty difficult to decide to go all the way out there? I mean, I guess kind of fill us in on those details if you don't mind my asking.
I think, one of the things to remember at the time, COVID had just started, and California was instituting some pretty draconian laws,
sure,
in relation to COVID. And we came out to visit Florida, and Florida just seemed to be like a much happier place in general. Like people were enjoying themselves. The business was going on. There wasn't this whole question of, she's a nurse, so we didn't have a problem there and surviving. But there wasn't a whole question as to how I was going to earn my income, because being in the fitness industry in California from 2020 to 2021 or whatever, that probably wouldn't have worked out so well. So, wanted to be in a place where I could earn an income and earn a living and survive, and California wasn't in it at the time. And so, it really wasn't a difficult question. I think it's harder now for her. She'd lived in California her whole life. Her whole family was out there. I'm an East Coaster. I grew up in Connecticut.
Right.
I come down to Florida as a kid. I have friends out here. My best friend from the Marine Corps, he lives out here in Miami. And so, it's a much easier transition for me, but she's been handling it well. And we've been, like I said, we've had a lot of success since we've been out here. Florida has been good to me in a way that California never was. I've been able to purchase 2 houses since I've been out here. I've been able to to get ahead, and really didn't have that opportunity out in California. So it's been great.
Yeah, so a lot. It sounds like you kind of hit the ground running. I mean, we're talking like just a span of 2 short years, and you already, own 2 houses. Obviously everything's going well, work wise, professional wise, and then of course now just in kind of sort of the way of you pursuing, hobbies, passions, and other interests, and you've gotten yourself into stand-up comedy, as I mentioned too. So I guess. And I have to admit, brother, this kind of took me like by surprise because obviously, you and I connected through the realm of podcasting, and of course, the Warrior Soul podcast. I'm not going to say it's like a totally like super duper like serious podcast. There, you do have some guests where you have like some good banter, some good humor thrown in there. But I mean, it's not meant to be a comedic podcast. So to kind of see you make this transition, I guess I'll just say I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
So I guess just what kind of got you, down that path to pursue comedy.
Nobody thought that including my girl, who I've been with for 10 years, thought that I would ever do this. I don't think anybody ever saw it. If anybody who knows me or who knew me for a long time, they wouldn't think it either. And it's kind of something that I always had within me, but never, really talked about. And, one of the cool things about being down here in South Florida, the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, is that there's a lot going on, and there was a lot going on over the last 2 years. People were living their lives. So, Shauna and I went out to a kava bar one day because I don't drink or anything like that. I don't touch alcohol. But in a kava bar is a cool place to hang out if you don't drink alcohol. So they had a comedy show going on there, and I was watching the comedians, and they were doing their acts, and I was like, I want to do that. And then one of the guys who's a friend of mine now, he said, hey, there's going to be an open mic afterward, and anybody who wants to come up and do it, come up and do it. If you think you got it, try it out. So I went up and I did a single joke, and people kind of laughed, but it wasn't like a real laugh. But from then on, I was like, oh man, I really want to do this. And then, I researched all the open mics in the area. And one of the cool things again about being in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area is that if you want to do comedy every night of the week, there's an open mic somewhere every night of the week. So you can literally drive around and do that. And so that's what I did. And I kept doing it, and I'm still pretty much a novice at it. I'm under a year of comedy under my belt, but I've been able to do new faces at the Miami Improv. I've done new faces at Dania Beach Improv. I've gotten into booked shows, and it's been a really great side deal for me. Whether it's ever going to lead to anything, I don't really care. I just enjoy doing it. It's fun. And it's something that I can do forever if I want to, so there's not like an hourglass on me saying, hey, like I did with bodybuilding, like, hey, you've got, you're 35 years old and you're trying to squat 500 pounds. It's probably not good for your knees. I can tell jokes forever. Right. So,
right. Yeah, I gotcha. Now, did you have any anxieties going up on stage? Because I feel like I've heard the statistics somewhere, and I haven't really verified this before getting on the call with you, but I guess some people claim that they actually fear public speaking more than like literal death. So I guess just getting up in front of a crowd and actually trying to perform from a crowd and just hoping that, your jokes land is just, did that make you nervous at all? Or did you kind of feel like, it just kind of came to you a little bit more naturally just being up there in front of people? What did that feel like?
I gotta say, I get nervous? Yeah, of course. I don't really have a fear of public speaking, I guess. And I think the Marine Corps kind of like takes that out of you in a lot of ways because,
sure, yeah,
you end up doing things like boards and things like that, and inspections and all that kind of thing. And I don't really find the prospect of getting up in front of a bunch of people scary. In fact, I think I do better in front of large crowds than I do for smaller crowds. I think the improv audiences are much easier to do comedy in front of than like a regular bar or something like that. But no, man, like it really hasn't, that aspect of it hasn't affected me now.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, another thing I was kind of curious to ask you, getting into comedy, like especially like right now, we've kind of seen some rather interesting things happen in the world of comedy. We're seeing comedians like, getting accosted right up on stage. We saw this, with Chris Rock and Will Smith, that whole fiasco. And then I think it was also one of Dave Chappelle's shows where someone ran up on stage and tried to attack him. Has that been a concern at all, to where it's just like, if you tell the wrong joke, someone in the crowd is just probably not going to like it, and they're going to, make it a point to get up on stage and let you know that?
No, I mean, like, I don't, it's not like a fear or anything like that. What I would say is this, like, I also think that it's a really great time to be a stand-up comedian, because you've got guys like Dave Chappelle and so many other like really awesome comedians are out there right now just doing it, and I think it's probably an easier time to be a stand-up comic now than it's ever been in the history of the world, because of social media, right? Like, we have a lot more people at each other's throats, but it's easier now to get discovered than it's ever been. You don't have gatekeepers or anything like that.
Right.
So I would say that, if anything, it's been remarkably easy for me to get into this. A lot easier than I ever thought it would be. There's a lot of prep that goes into a lot of work. I write every day. I try to come up with new material constantly. You've got to practice, you got to stay sharp. But, I would say if there's anybody out there who really wants to try it, I would say go out there, find a mic and try it, because right now is probably the best time ever to do it,
Right. Well, and I also think with times like these, I think some people just really might need a good laugh. I mean, it's just, with everything that's going on, and, and we don't really need to dive too deep down that rabbit hole. That'd be an entirely different podcast in and of itself. But really, it's just, I had one of my Marines say this to me one time, like nearly 20 years ago, and it kind of just stuck with me. He said, laugh and smile at least once a day. Otherwise you wasted the day. And I think because that's just really necessary. It's good for our mental health. It's good for our physical health to laugh and to, find things humorous. And so I think comedy is probably more essential now than it probably ever has been. So,
Right. Yeah, I agree. And I think that, there's a small percentage of the population out there who's going to have a problem with everything, and I think by far most of the people I've run into are normal people who just want to laugh, and they don't take everything so seriously, that's a big thing. And I think one of the issues going on is that, I think we're putting such a spotlight on a noisy minority of people who just really want to grab all the attention. And that's why, the world is acting the way it is right now. There's such a spotlight on a bunch of angry people, and I think that by and large, most of us just want to get along and to raise our kids and to, live good lives. And that's the majority of people. Then there's a bunch of, a minority of people who just want to make everything more difficult,
Right. I remember when I came to see you in Miami, a few months ago, and, I just remember the crowd that we had there at that show. You got patrons from all, walks of life, different skin colors, different ethnicities. Some people were obviously more, brought up in the city, some more maybe out in the country somewhere, entirely different walks of life. But everyone is in there just like laughing. And of course, with the comedians that we had in the lineup, I mean, nothing was off limits there either. You had a pretty diverse group of comedians, and nothing was off limits hardly. But it's just everyone there left, there with just having a good experience because the comedians were just funny and it was just a good time. I mean, that's it. So.
Right. And that's another really great thing about South Florida is it's so diverse here. Like I have friends from all different cultures, from all different races out here. And, it's funny because, California is supposed to be this like bastion of progressive thought, liberalism, but like, it seemed like people of different races didn't hang out with each other out there at all. Like it was one of the weirdest places I've ever been in my life, and like it was just like, and that's the way Los Angeles was, that's the way Santa Barbara was, that's the way every place I'd lived was, like it just didn't people of different races didn't like associating with each other, and out here it's very different, people of all different races hanging out with each other all the time,
Right. Well, and then also with veterans, because that was the show that I got to attend, was an all veteran comedian comedy show. And then of course you're doing something similar here for Veterans Day, which and I don't know if we'll have this podcast out before then, but it's just veterans are kind of unique in the realm of humor because we utilize a lot of dark humor, and much of this is kind of built out of necessity, considering, just the nature of many veterans' jobs and what we are called to do. Dark humor it becomes very necessary. So I guess just, getting out of the Marine Corps, just kind of going back a little bit here and just, not only I would imagine it was hard to find people who could relate to just what you have gone through in the Marine Corps and having deployed and seeing and experiencing what you have, but also I'm sure that your sense of humor probably didn't land very well too. Like when you got in the civilian populace, cracking a joke that would probably make one of your brothers that you were deployed with just go crazy. But then the civilian side, it probably might have been very well received. So I guess, has that been an issue with you at all?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, I was in grad school out in California, which is kind of a weird place to be if you're a veteran, right? And I had a very different sense of humor from a lot of people out there, but and I think that from the time you're a little kid, in a lot of ways, you're told to repress that. You're told to repress that side of you, and to not be wild, to not be crazy, to not do this or that. And I think that, comedy's a great thing for people who have that side of them and who are naturally wild, and maybe they don't have a great outlet to express that side of themselves in society, and there's a number of different ways you could express things like that. I mean, I used to express it in the gym and do crazy workouts and things like that. And, I used to write stories and things like that. Now I get to do it on stage and I get to make people laugh, and I think that's cool. So,
right. Well, it's also kind of a cool, medium to, like you said, in the realm of creativity and self-expression, because, your feedback is immediate, right there, where it's just, you put yourself out there, you get that immediate feedback, which, could be positive or negative. I mean, like I said, if a joke lands, obviously the crowd is going to respond with laughter. And if the joke doesn't land, they're going to respond, with silence, where it's like other forms where, it's just, if you put out, let's say, written work, or even with this podcast, it's just, we're doing this podcast now, but people aren't going to see it for a week or two, or however long it's going to take to get it released. But in comedy, the feedback is immediate. So I guess kind of going along with that, though, is just how do you kind of adjust yourself accordingly in real time when you're on stage, where it's just, if you, let's say, get to a certain part of your act and it doesn't seem to be resonating with your audience, and then do you kind of just go about with what you planned, or do you shift gears and actually maybe bump into improv? I guess just what kind of goes your mind in real time on stage?
It depends on what the goal of being on stage is for that particular night. If the goal is to practice new material, then I'm going to stick to my guns and keep doing the new material, even whether it's working or not, just because my whole reason for being up there is to see whether or not they're laughing at something. And if they're not laughing, that's telling me something. And if they are laughing, that's telling me something else, So if it's a practice set, I'm going to stick to my guns and maybe bomb that night and not get a laugh, if it's a show that people, they scheduled it, and they if it's a booked show where people came to be entertained, then I'm going to go with my best stuff, and I'm going to try and make people laugh as much as possible. But I think one of the cool things about being a comedian is that you're actually creating the art with an audience, right? So, a lot of times you don't know if a joke is going to work until you're out there in front of an audience. And unless you're taking that risk that people are not going to laugh, you're not getting better. You're not growing. You're not, it's a lot like martial arts and jujitsu. If you're doing one thing all the time, you're not getting better. But if you're taking risks and you're opening your guard and you're giving up certain things to gain angles on other things, then you're growing, right? And so, that's the way comedy is too. You've got to take risks in order to grow.
Well, you got to do that with virtually anything in life, any area in life. I mean, obviously, you took the risk to move all the way out to South Florida from California. And again, that's like nearly 3,000 miles. And, moving your girlfriend out of the place where she's been familiar with her entire life, she took a risk in that way too. So it's just, it is just one of those things you just kind of got to, make a decision, go with it. And, and if it doesn't work, course correct and just try to find either like adjust accordingly, eliminate what doesn't work and absorb what does work, like how Bruce Lee said. So, it just sounds like that's what you really got to do. And it's what you're finding yourself in the realm of comedy, for sure. So I guess now, do you see yourself, expanding like outward? I mean, obviously you're operating within like Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. Like, have you thought about maybe trying to bump up to some neighboring cities like Orlando or maybe Tampa to try to try your hand at maybe a show up there or anything?
Yeah, I'd love to. If given the opportunity, I would definitely love to get out there and do some comedy. I'm going up to Connecticut from the 18th through the 22nd, and I'm going to be looking for shows up there that I could potentially do.
Nice.
So of course, I definitely want to expand. I think for right now, my biggest goal is to just get better, and I want to compete in Florida's Funniest next year. They just did that show this year. So that'll be a big goal for me. I want to perform in some comedy festivals. I want to get up to doing a 20-minute set. I think that would be great, and I think, that is the best part of being down here. There's so many opportunities to go after these comedy goals. I'm not, here's what I'll say about like the whole thing. Again, I'm a blessed person. I've got a job. I make great income. I've got passive income. So, I'm not here and trying to do this to survive. It's not like I'm going to make it or bust or anything like that, because
Sure.
I did that for a long time with bodybuilding and with podcasting and a whole bunch of different things. And I'm not in that mindset anymore. I'm just doing this to have a great time, honestly. And as long as I'm doing that and having a great time and enjoying myself, it's as long as I'm going to do it. The second I don't enjoy it anymore is the second I'm going to stop doing it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So now when it comes to working on this craft and, developing new material, like as you go on, like you said, you're probably looking to do a 20-minute set in the future here. So, but just gathering material for, whatever length you expect to be on stage, what does that process entail? Like, where do you kind of like draw, I guess I'll say, inspiration from when you come up with material that you want to use on stage?
Generally from life, I find a concept, right? Like the concept will come into my head and then I'll put it into my notebook over here and I'll just write the concept down. And then later on, I'll go to my computer and I'll work on fleshing it out, actually writing it and doing it that way. And then I'll add it to a set that I'm going to do at an open mic and then try it out. And I'll try it out a number of different ways from a number of different angles before I put it to rest for a little bit. And then maybe I'll awaken it again for a set down the line. I've written a lot of material since I've started, pages and pages and pages of jokes. And I think that, at the end of, that what I'm looking for is I'm looking to eventually put together an hour worth of material so that, I'd have an hour worth of material if I ever got a chance to do a special. And then once you do a special, you start that process all over again and you're working on new material after that,
Right. Yeah. Well, and of course, if you're talking about life related stuff, of course, a lot of people are going to just relate to that as well, because chances are, I mean, again, we kind of talked about this earlier. Like, we may be like pretty diverse, when it comes to just, especially like you mentioned there in South Florida, diverse group of people. But really, we're all kind of just dealing with like the same stuff, but just in kind of like our own like different ways. Like, we're all kind of dealing with troubles at work, trouble with the economy, troubles in relationships, troubles financially every now and then. I mean, we're all dealing with the same stuff. So it's just, I mean, I think drawing from that, there's probably a lot to go off of there when it comes to developing material that's going to resonate with your audience.
Tons of stuff, tons of stuff. I think, there's a lot of comics out here who don't have like a full-time job, and they don't do the work thing. They're just trying to make it as comics. And I think to myself, like that, they're kind of at a disadvantage because they're not living the normal life that's going to lead to a lot of the funny things, you know what I mean? And that's where I get a lot of my stuff. I get a lot of stuff from my relationship. I get a lot of stuff from my Marine Corps experience. I get a lot of stuff from just living life every day and going about my business. And that's the coolest part of this art, is that it comes from living, and that's the coolest part of any art. I mean, the best music comes from actually living. The best drawing and paintings, I think, come from actually living,
Yeah, definitely. So right on, brother. All right, man. Well, I know I got to let you go here pretty soon, but, before we kind of get to wrapping up here, I guess, where can our audience go to connect with you? I mean, where can they stay up to date about you wanting to share upcoming shows and appearances? Fill us in on that.
So my comedy Instagram is at Chris Palmitessa Comedy. So that's PALMITESSA. First name is Chris, CHRS. So Chris Palmitessa Comedy on Instagram. I'm still at Warrior Soul of Goji with the podcast. I haven't been publishing the Warrior Soul podcast as much as I'd like to. I'm going to be getting back into publishing that again soon. But we've been kind of taking a break with everything going on.
Sure.
But I've been publishing episodes with my buddy Albert, and we've been discussing life and philosophy and things like that. I'm sure at some point I'll get back into doing interviews, but if you want to see some awesome interviews, and including one I've done with Josh here, you can definitely check out our archives. I've had Josh on, I've had on Robert Greene, the author of the 48 Laws of Power. I've had on Eddie Gallagher, the Navy SEAL, Boss Rutan, tons and tons of people. So you can definitely check that out. If you want to see my former work as a trainer and nutrition coach, you could check out the Warrior Soul Goji YouTube channel. And that's about it.
All right. And I'll get all those linked up in the show notes for this episode. All right. So for the last...
Also,
go ahead.
I got to mention this. Like you said, we've got a show going on Veterans Day. I don't know when this will be published, but it's going to be at Gypsy Moon Vape and Brews in Pembroke Pines, Florida. You guys can come out, have a beer. You can vape while you're in there, and we're going to have a really awesome all veteran lineup for that show. So.
Okay. All right. And yeah, like I mentioned, all those will get linked up in the show notes for this episode, so the listeners can go and find them there. All right, man. So the last few questions that I have for you, we'll kind of do these a little bit rapid fire. First thing I want to ask you, and I'm not sure if I asked you this last time when I had you on, but I'm asking my guests to issue a challenge to our listeners. So what challenge would you issue to our listeners today for them to go out there and start living a more adventurous life?
I would say think about something that you've always wanted to do and go out there and do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, go do it like now or very, very soon. Because how many times have people say, "Oh, I'll do that next year once I got this taken care of," or "I'll do those 5 years from now once I got this situated." But it's just like, how much longer are you going to keep pushing it back until you're until the sand runs out of your hourglass?
Right.
Just exactly. So just get on it. So awesome, Ren. All right. So next I have my final three for you. And you've answered these before, but I'm curious to see if your answers have changed at all. And again, we'll do these kind of rapid fire here. And the first of those three questions is, what is your favorite place that you've been to so far?
My favorite place that I've been to so far, I think I said London last time, and I think I'm going to stick with London. I really love London, England. I think it's a great place. What did I say London last time? I'm not sure.
Actually, I mean, I'm ashamed to say I didn't even check to see what you have said last
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so everyone's just going to have to go back and listen to our first conversation, to get
yeah.
all that info. So, okay.
I
But
like Greece a lot too, but London, England's like probably my favorite city. I just got a lot of good memories there.
yeah, likewise. I mean, I've been there probably around like 3 times now. It's one of my favorite cities that I've been to around the world. Well, a lot of it, is the history, and also a lot of it is food. It's a
Yeah.
culinary capital. You got so many good food choices there. So right on, man. I concur with you. All right, next question. What is one thing on your bucket list that you have yet to do?
One thing on my bucket list that I have yet to do. Trying to think. There's definitely stuff on my bucket list. I want to definitely like travel to more countries in Europe.
Mm,
I definitely want to head to more countries. I want to get to Scotland. I want to get to France. I want to get to Belgium. So that's one thing. And then um, hmm, I want to like work in an import export business, like
mm.
dealing like I'm obsessed with the world economy in some ways, and like I really want to like right now I export a lot of anchors and things like that to different countries. I would love to be an importer exporter of tobacco. Like
Mm.
that would be a big thing for me.
Gotcha. Okay. As you were mentioning Europe, the country that kind of and import export, what came to mind for me right away was Switzerland, actually, and Swiss watches, because I've actually went to a Swiss watch store when I was in Lucerne, Switzerland. Pretty much, I think like the cheapest watch you can find in that store is maybe like 5 grand. And like they had some that in there that cost about like up to about half a mil, if not more. So, and it was like 4 stories of just watches. So I don't
Mhm.
know. For some reason, that just stood out to me when you mentioned that. So Switzerland would be my recommendation to at least go
Yeah.
visit. So
I'm kind of obsessed with the tobacco, like not like the cigarette industry, but like the cigar industry.
mm,
And I'm obsessed with like the manufacturing of those things because they're all like individual miracles. Like the crop has to be perfect, in order for it to come through. There no bugs could come through. You got to watch the weather. It can't be too much rain or anything like that. And then when the leaves got to cure a certain way, and then they've got to ferment a certain way, and you've got to watch the humidity for like 5-6 years while they're fermenting, and then once they're rolled they've got to age for another 8 to 10 months, and it's all kinds
really?
of crazy things. Yeah, it takes like 7 years to produce a cigar from seed to cigar. uh,
Wow.
and like the economy between the United States and like Nicaragua, who's like the largest exporter of cigars. It's not Cuba, because Cuban cigars are illegal here in the United States. But I mean, we feed so many people in Nicaragua through our cigar consumption, right? Because if you go to a place like Esteli in Nicaragua, the whole economy is based around this. So
Wow.
yeah.
You're kind of blowing my mind here. I had no idea that the process to make cigars was so in depth like that. That's actually really cool though. So
Yeah, check out. There's a good documentary that just came out. It's called Hand Rolled.
hand rolled.
Yeah, you can learn all about the history and the everything behind cigars right now.
Cool. Oh, right on, man. So curious to see what you make of that someday, because I have noticed that. Yeah, you do post a lot of cigar content too, like cigar talks and things like that, like on Instagram
Yeah,
too. So okay,
yeah, it's interesting. And then the other thing that's caught my attention is the United States is currently thinking about putting a ban on Nicaraguan imports, which would obviously ruin the lives of a lot of people down there. So
right.
you know, just food for thought.
Gotcha. All right, very interesting, brother. All right, and the last question, and this is a two-parter. What is your favorite animal, and have you seen this animal in the wild?
So I'd normally say my dog Piper. And yes, I have, but uh, and I love her more than anything. But the orangutan, I think I saw one of those out in Busch Gardens. Never seen it in the wild, but it's just like the coolest looking animal I've ever seen.
Yeah, and they're innovative and they're tough animals too. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Orangutan it is then. All right, brother. Well, that's it. That's all the questions that I have for you today. But before we call it a day here, let's just recap one more time where we can go to connect with you, where we can, keep up with you and what you're doing and, the podcast. So, yeah, man, what do you got for us?
So, yeah, again, Chris Palmitessa Comedy is where you can follow my comedy Instagram. And then I'm at Warrior Solo Goji for my podcast. And then you can follow Warrior Solo Goji for Instagram too. And then www.warriorsologoji.com if you want to check out all the other podcasts that I've done.
All right, cool, man. And like I said, I'll get all those linked up in the show notes for our listeners to go and find them there. All right, brother. Well, I want to thank you again for taking the time for joining me on the show and, making a second appearance on here. It's just I've been hoping to try to catch you those few times I was down in Miami, but I know you got a busy schedule with everything that you're doing. So, but if I find myself down there again, I'll have to hit you up and see what you got going on so I can come watch you perform again. Because like I said, I had a really good time when you and the other veteran comedians put on that show, and and also just appreciated the cause that you were putting it on for too. So yeah, man, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. I really appreciate you having me on, and it's been my pleasure.
All right, right on, brother. Well, there you have it, everyone. Another awesome episode of the All Around Adventure podcast is in the books. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Chris today. I know I had a great time chatting with him, and I definitely encourage you all to go connect with him on Instagram and check out the Warrior Soul podcast. And you'll find links to both of those in the show notes for this episode. And if you did, in fact, enjoy today's episode of the All Around Adventure podcast, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. This is a weekly podcast. We got something coming at you every single Monday. So hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening so that way you don't miss a single episode. Also, you can support the podcast by heading over to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a 5-star rating and review. That'll get us trending higher so that way more people can find the show and get some value from it just like you have. And lastly, before I call it a day here, I just want to once again thank you for being here today. I know you're busy and I know you got a lot going on and there's so much out there on the internet these days, but the fact that you chosen to download this podcast to listen to what I had to say today and also what my guest Chris had to share, I greatly appreciate it and I certainly don't take it for granted. And that's all I have for now, and I'll be back next Monday with a brand new solo cast, so be sure to check back in for that. But until then, I'm Josh Guerrero saying be safe, happy travels, and always move forward.